talk about the history behind the publishing of my book, Tales, Curious Stories of the Human-Animal Bond. The material in that book comes from a history of me from a small boy to now, of owning pets and having pets in my life, but a lot of it comes from the stories that I hear from my clients. I'm a veterinarian, and I got really interested in hearing from them what the bond was like for them. I've been to school a long time. If I start from the first grade, it's been about 20 years that I went to school. I went to college down at WSU, and in the veterinary program, it takes a long time. I was 8 years there, and I really got sick of academia. It's just difficult for me. And by the time I graduated, all my classmates were all excited about where they were going to get the first job. And when it came to me, I said, I'm leaving. And so I left. I got on a plane and I flew to Australia, the land down under. Interesting book here by Bill Bryson. Maybe some of you read it, The Sunburned Country, but he's an author that does a lot of travel books, and that was really interesting. I loved Australia. And when I got there, the first place I arrived at was Sydney. You've probably seen the Opera House. I was there way back when it was being developed. And I can remember walking around trying to find a job, and I got a job as a small animal veterinarian in Sydney. And so I got to talk with the local culture there, the Australians. They're similar to Americans. They love their pets. I had a great time. I was there for a couple of years, and I decided it was time to move, so I went to Perth, which is on the western side of Australia. Got off the plane, and I thought, well, I need another job. And I found another small animal job there in Perth, and I was there for about a year before coming home. Before coming home, what the Australians do is they take the overland. And I went to Nepal, Kathmandu, got on a camping bus and rode back to England. Went through India, Kashmir, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, and that was back in the 70s when you could do those things. It was a great experience for me, and it kind of made me ready to come down to Spokane and settle down into a small animal practice. And I was in that practice for a good 30 years before I retired a number of years ago. Towards the end of about the middle of my career in veterinary medicine here in Spokane, I made a couple of changes. I took a leave of absence and I went back to college and I got a degree in counseling. And you think, why would a veterinarian do that? And the reason was that one of the things that veterinarians have to do is they have to put pets to sleep. They don't live that long, and so you meet the client, you see the puppy, and then all of a sudden it seems like they're in there with tears in their eyes, a lot of grief, and now I have to put to sleep the pet that I've ushered through life. And I realized that, we had no training in veterinary school on doing that. And so I was uncomfortable with all these emotions, and so getting a counseling degree really helped me. Better help people that were really in misery about the loss of their pet. And then now I use that counseling degree with the Washington Health Program, and I am a counselor for physicians, veterinarians, and nurse practitioners that have problems with addiction. And I've been doing that now for quite a few years. So where does that bring me? Yeah, the second part of the change that I made in veterinary medicine from counseling was I started to become really interested in the human-animal bond. And I started interviewing my clients and going, what is it about pets that make you feel bonded? And I got all these wonderful stories of what solidified that bond for them. And then I thought, is there any unifying home that all these stories can fit under? And I came upon one that I think really fit well. And I'm going to give that to you in the form of a story. And the story involves a client of mine. His name was Bruce, and I've known him all through my career here with his pets. He loved golden retrievers. And I saw a number of them through the years, but it was the later years when I was dealing with his pet called Cody. And Cody had an arthritic condition of the elbows and the knees, similar to rheumatic fever in people. And it was a crippling disease. And for a number of years, I was trying to make the dog more comfortable. There was no cure for it, and it just progressed. And then one day I noticed that Bruce came in to see me again. It was late afternoon, and I just felt kind of apprehensive. And I walked into the room, and he was sitting there in a chair staring at the floor, and his eyes were swollen, and his face was red, and I knew that he'd been crying. And then Cody, who usually comes up to see me, even with the arthritis, lick my hand and get a little treat, he just laid there on a blanket and wagged his tail. That's a great way that dogs say hello. And I saw that, and then all of a sudden Bruce said something. He said, "It's time." And for veterinarians, that phrase, "it's time," I've heard too many times. It's a signal of surrender. And Bruce had worked with his pet for a number of years and realized that the suffering had got to the point it was time to end his life. So he got down on the floor, put his little head on his knee, and I got down and moved his dog into another point in his life and euthanized his dog. And so Bruce left my practice that day without his beloved pet in tow. But just as he left, he turned to me and he said, "Bob, I want to tell you a story someday, but I'm not ready now." And so he set that to my mind, and a couple of months later, he called me up, and I went out to coffee with him, and he told me this story. He said, "When I was a young boy, I had a golden retriever you never met. It was before I met you. And his name was Max. And it was an important pet to me because my dad was a military man. And military men move around all the time. And he said, so it was really hard for me to make a friend. Every time I'd get some friends to play with, my dad would move his career into another place. And so we moved around all the time. And so Max became really my only friend. And I could identify with that, how I felt about that. Well, one day, one of the moves his dad made, moved into a new town, and Bruce had to go to a high school as a stranger. And maybe you folks can remember a time in your life when you were a stranger and how that felt. Maybe as a kid you moved to a new neighborhood, or maybe you moved to a new town, or like me when I moved to Hawaii. When I got into high school, we moved to Hawaii, and I was a white kid, and I moved into a school as a stranger, so I know what that felt like. But Bruce had a couple of things about him that made that move particularly difficult. He was short. Not kind of short. He was the shortest kid in his class. And he was overweight. He was a short, fat stranger. And so that made it really difficult for him, and how he got along from all the kidding he was getting was through humor. And there's a name for that survival mode in military kids. It's called military brats. Have you ever heard that term? And I experienced that when I went to Hawaii, because there's military bases all around, and I met these kids that were military brats, and they really had learned how to survive. And so Bruce did. He was able to use humor. And that humor worked for him in all areas except PE class, physical education. I don't know what it's called now. But what happened there is there was a group of boys that took kidding and moved it into bullying. And they'd bully him at the end of the PE class when he was naked and got into the shower. And they would go into that shower and they would tease him and bully him about his fat little body. And so that made life really difficult for him during his school years. And then the counseling in me made me look at that a little bit more closely, what bullies are like. And I believe that in our human nature, bullying is really damaging. And it's really sad that we as a species have that as a way we sometimes interact. And so I thought, well, how do you compare bullying to kidding? Kidding just goes skin deep. But bullying, when it's chronic, wounds the heart. And the wound that it causes is called shame. And shame is a really interesting thing to study. There's books written about it, and it's kind of complicated and it's serious. But I found a little brief statement that made me understand shame. And it goes like this. You compare it to guilt. Guilt is a feeling you have when you make a mistake. Shame is the belief that you are a mistake. And I think that Bruce was beginning to think of himself as a mistake. But every day, at the end of the school year, at the end of the school day, he would climb on that yellow school bus and would take him out to the rural neighborhood. And the bus would drop him off, and he'd look up on the hillside where his house was, and just like clockwork, his golden retriever would leap off the porch and come running down to join up with him. And that meeting was always the same. It was a kind of a chaotic time, called it their happy dance, where Max would get up on his hind legs and twirl around, put his paws up on his shoulder, lick his face. And I got to thinking, you know, how many of my clients have stories about the happy dance and how dogs or cats greet you after you've been gone a long time. And that was a metaphor for Bruce. It was a metaphor for what I said early in the story, some kind of a common theme under the bond. And what I came to see that theme is called acceptance. But it's a different kind of acceptance. It's unconditional acceptance. And I got to thinking, in our human species, our acceptance is conditional. As children, we've got parents, and we've got rules and guides and boundaries, and it follows us all through school and work. We always have, as a way of being accepted, boundaries put down and conditions. And so it's really, I think, a unique thing that what pets can give people is unconditional acceptance that I don't think we find in the human species. I thought about how people, when they are bullied in school, especially teenagers, and how there's a lot of problems now. You've heard problems in our teenage population and increase in suicide and stuff, of how important some of these kids have to go home and have a pet. And so I wrote down here some things that I think unconditional acceptance that a pet can give a teenager. Pets don't care if you're fat or skinny. They don't care if you're tall or short. They don't care if you belong to a clique or a member of a team or if you're in a club. They don't care. They don't care what kind of clothes you wear. They don't care if you stutter. They don't care if you wear thick glasses or wear braces or if you walk with a limp. And all these things teenagers get bullied for, but not from pets. Some people struggle academically, and pets accept you no matter where you are, whether you're taking special classes or you go to an alternative school. Unconditional acceptance makes those people that have learning disabilities feel comforted. And best of all, and now maybe I shouldn't mention this, but it's sure true, is that pets accept you no matter how you smell. In fact, the worse you smell, I think the better they like you. And they don't care what color of skin you wear. All they require is to be fed, to have a place to sleep, and then get a pat on the head occasionally. And for that, in return, they surrender their unconditional acceptance. At the end of the meeting with Bruce, he said something to me that I will never forget, relating to the bullying that he'd received in school. He said, Max made me bully-proof. Max made me bully-proof. And he saved my life. And I knew he was talking about part of the time that he probably was considering suicide. And I think pets sometimes save people from a lot of difficulties. And they do it through unconditional acceptance. And they do it without speech. It's all through the body language. And I think that's a unique thing about pets. And the bond is truly one of life's great mysteries. And so that was the background that led me to writing the book, Tales. And that is the end of my presentation, other than the fact that, is there any questions that my presentation has brought up in your thoughts about pets or bullying or whatever? Yeah.
You said you were a counselor for doctors?
Yeah, later on.
And how did that work? How does that work?
How did it happen, or?
Could you just say a little more about that?
Yeah. There's one thing about me that I don't disclose usually, is I'm a recovering alcoholic. I've been in recovery now for almost 40 years. But part of the recovery that leads me to a lot of stories and exploring feelings and all these things put me in a perfect position to become a counselor. And so that's probably the biggest motivation of getting into that, was my previous history. Yeah. Any other things that might come up to your mind that you would like to ask about pets? Or have any of you experienced being bullied or knowing people who have been bullied, and how difficult that
Grade
is?
school.
Pardon?
Grade school, yeah.
Grade school. Yeah.
Sure.
So maybe you could understand that some of these kids that went home and had a pet could be comforting for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a pet now.
Yeah.
Yeah. It sure helps a lot.
Yeah.
And helps you connect with other people. Dogs are amazing that way. I mean, when you go out with your dog, it's like a whole special community of people
Yeah.
you start to connect with. I never realized was out there.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a dog as a child, but I had a duck.
You know, it's interesting.
But
you
the
said-
duck probably helped me.
Yeah,
too.
okay. I was thinking of special situations where pets really help. And one is people that come out of prison. Sometimes all they have is a pet for a while. Homeless people. Have you ever seen homeless people with a lead
Yeah.
and they have a dog?
Oh,
It's kind of like that lead and the dog is kind of like their mobile home. That's all they
Yeah.
have. Or people that are housebound, that are afraid to go out,
Service
claustrophobic.
animals.
Pardon?
Service
Animals, people that have disabilities and they use service animals is another example. And another one is people that are married and their kids have moved away and then their spouse dies. And all they have is their pet. And through their pet, they kind of connect with the person that's passed on because of all the relationships that they can recall. And so I'd like to see a program done about that, interviewing all those people where pets have made a special place in their life for the reasons I just mentioned.
Vets who have PTSD, it's not
PTSD, great one, yeah.
service animal.
Yeah, service animals. Well, any other questions other than that? Yeah.
I was just saying a few words about how you came to publish that book. And
Yeah,
plan to keep writing?
Well, writing was important for me to recall what was really in this human-animal bond. And so it was a gradual process. The computer, and I'd sit down and I'd have a concept and I'd write on it and let it sit for a while and move on to another one, and then try to figure out how these stories might be bound together to make some sense. And then my wife, I kind of procrastinate, and she'd say, "How are you doing?" "Oh, why don't you try get down to work?" And it took a while. And then when I got it published, I realized that I'm not a marketer. And I think that's a failing. I think if you invest time in writing a book, you need to put some effort into marketing. And I didn't. I just let it sit there. My wife would say, "Aren't you going to market it? It's a good book. Why don't you market it?" And so I finally, joining this program here, I thought, I got to figure out, learn how to market. Because books just don't fly off the shelf if you don't do anything.
Pick up your book and hold it up for the camera.
Book-
Marketing
hold it up to the
101.
camera.
There it is.
Yes, Tales, Curious Stories of the Human-Animal Bond. Robert Slack, DVM. I had a great career as a veterinarian. And you know what? I really enjoy retirement. And it's like, I heard people when they leave their work, they're kind of lost. I just really enjoy the freedom of doing things like coming here, and I do a lot of traveling, and so I really enjoy my retirement. And now my wife wants me to put some effort into marketing this book.
Do you have any pets?
I have a pet, yeah. I was going to bring my pet. I've had all my life hunting dogs. And I live out in Colbert, and every day I take these walks, and they would just have a great time. But then they passed on. They're buried out on my property. And I thought, my wife said, if the dog's passed on, she said, "You need another dog." I'm not ready for that. "No, you need it." "No, that's fine." So finally one day she says, "I think I found a dog." And she showed me the dog, and it's hopeless. I got her. And she's a small dog, so she fits in the car. You've seen these dogs that get up in that little thing next to you and look out the window and travel with me. And so she's a great dog in my retirement. Her name's Kai. In high school in Hawaii, I lived in Kailua, a town over the Pali from Honolulu. And the Kai means ocean and Lua means toilet. So I thought maybe Kai would be the better part of that. She likes the name.
Was yours self-published? Excuse me, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Or did you get an agent?
To what?
For your book? Was it self-published or did you find an
To
agent?
get it published?
Uh-huh.
What I did is a person recommended a place in Korea, and they published the book there.
Really?
Yeah. And I have the name of the lady here that did that, and the connection I made for that, and I have the book in audio,
Uh-huh.
and I think that's another way I need to market, but I haven't. I think I'm on the verge of kind of getting that organized. Doing that.